It was a cold Monday morning in a small, quiet town where everyone knew everyone. The sun had just started to rise, spreading soft orange light over the rooftops. The trees stood still. The streets were almost empty, except for a yellow school bus slowly moving through the neighborhood. Behind the steering wheel sat Jonathan Reed, a man in his late 50s, with silver hair and a calm face. He had been driving the school bus for nearly 10 years. Every morning, he followed the same route, picking up children from their homes and taking them safely to school. Jonathan liked his job, enjoyed seeing the children's sleepy faces turning into smiles as they stepped on the bus. He knew most of them by name, their favorite songs, and even their pets. Some kids liked to talk a lot, others preferred to sit quietly. But one little girl always stood out to him, Emily. Emily was a quiet, sweet 7-year-old girl who lived near the edge of town. She had big brown eyes, curly hair always tied in a neat ponytail, and a soft voice. She never caused trouble and always thanked Jonathan when she got off the bus. She usually sat in the second row near the window and looked outside the whole ride without saying much. Jonathan had a soft spot for her. Something about her calm, serious nature made him feel protective. That morning, Jonathan followed the usual route, stopped at the first corner, where 3 kids were already waiting, still yawning. Then he moved to the next street and picked up a few more children. Everything was going normally. He turned onto the last road near the woods, where Emily lived. Usually she was waiting outside with her backpack, standing still like a little soldier. But today, she wasn't there. Jonathan frowned and slowed the bus to a stop anyway. He checked his watch. He was on time. The engine hummed softly as the children on the bus chatted in low voices. Jonathan looked out the window again, expecting to see Emily come running from her house. But her front porch was empty. The front door was closed. No sign of her. He waited another minute. Then he looked in the side mirror and sighed. Maybe she was sick today. Reached for the gear shift, ready to drive off. But then something caught his eye from the side of the woods near Emily's house. A small figure came running fast. It was Emily, but not like he had ever seen her before. She wasn't walking calmly with her neat backpack. She was sprinting, barefoot, wearing just her pajamas. Her face was pale and tears streamed down her cheeks. Her ponytail was messy, and her arms were crossed over her chest as if she were freezing or scared or both. Jonathan jumped out of his seat and opened the door quickly. Emily rushed up the steps, crying hard. The children on the bus went silent, watching her in surprise. She didn't go to her usual seat. Instead, she stood next to Jonathan, shaking and sobbing. He knelt down beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "What happened, sweetie?" he asked, his voice soft but serious. Emily struggled to speak, breathing heavily between sobs. Her lips trembled. Finally, she whispered for words that sent a chill down Jonathan's spine. "He's hurting my mom." Jonathan froze. For a moment, it felt like time stopped. The words echoed in his ears. He stared at her, heart pounding. Her eyes looked up at him, full of fear and trust at the same time. She had run to him, not a neighbor, not a teacher, but to her bus driver. That meant something. He swallowed hard and nodded slowly. "Okay, you're safe now. I've got you," he said. Without wasting a second, Jonathan shut the bus door and gently guided Emily to the front seat. He grabbed the radio and contacted the school dispatcher. "This is Bus 7. I have an emergency. Student says there's a violent situation at home. Please notify the police immediately," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The dispatcher responded quickly, understanding the seriousness. They told him to head to the school as planned. They'd send officers to Emily's house. But Jonathan wasn't sure if that was fast enough. Every minute mattered. He looked at the other children who were now silent and watching him with wide eyes. Some looked scared. Others looked confused. Jonathan made a decision. He turned the bus around and headed straight for the police station, which was only 10 minutes away. He figured that was safer and faster. On the way, he kept glancing at Emily through the mirror. She had stopped crying, but her little body was still shaking. He could see she was holding back a lot of emotion. He spoke to her gently. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" he asked. Emily looked down at her hands. "Daddy came back this morning. Mommy didn't know. He was yelling and then hitting. I was in my room. I got out the window and ran. Jonathan's jaw clenched. He didn't say anything right away. He knew anger wouldn't help the little girl in front of him. He needed to stay calm for her. Thank you for telling me. Emily, you were very brave, he said softly. As the bus rolled through town, people looked up and noticed it was off route, but no one stopped them. At the police station, Jonathan parked the bus in the front lot, put on the brakes, and opened the door. 2 officers came out quickly when they saw the bus. This girl needs help, Jonathan said firmly, stepping out. And guiding Emily down the stairs, he explained what had happened, keeping it simple but clear. The officers nodded and moved quickly. One knelt beside Emily and spoke gently. Another officer asked Jonathan for the exact location of her house. He gave them all the details he knew. The children on the bus were now being guided inside the station. Officers gave them snacks and kept them occupied. Jonathan stayed close to Emily as the officers asked her more questions, careful not to overwhelm her. She told them what she had seen and how she had escaped. Her mother was still inside the house with her father. Police radioed backup immediately and sent officers straight to the address. Jonathan sat beside Emily, gently holding her hand. Her fingers were cold, and she leaned slightly into his side. Didn't say much, just stayed with her. A few minutes later, one of the officers came back and gave a small nod. They found the mother. She's hurt, but alive. The man is in custody, he told Jonathan quietly. Jonathan closed his eyes and breathed deeply. Emily looked up at him, searching his face for meaning. Your mom is safe now, he told her. They got there in time. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they were different. She didn't cry hard. She just leaned into Jonathan's chest, letting out a soft, relieved breath. The day that started as a normal school morning had turned into something unforgettable. Jonathan had never expected his life to change like that. A small girl, running barefoot and crying, had looked at him and spoken for words that would change everything, not just for her, but for him too. And though he didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of a story that would shake an entire town and finally bring light to the darkness hidden for too long. The air inside the police station felt heavy, like the room was holding its breath. Jonathan sat on a wooden bench with little Emily curled beside him. She had stopped crying, but her eyes were red and tired. Her small hands held tightly onto the sleeve of Jonathan's jacket, as if she was afraid that if she let go, everything would fall apart again. Jonathan didn't move. He just stayed by her side, letting her know he wasn't going anywhere. 2 officers had gone to Emily's house just a few minutes ago. Jonathan kept glancing at the entrance, waiting, hoping. He kept thinking about the fear in Emily's voice when she had whispered those 4 words, "He's hurting my mom." The words kept ringing in his ears. He had heard many things in his life, but nothing had ever shaken him like that. She had chosen him to run too. That meant something. It meant she had no one else she trusted. That thought hurt him deeply. While they waited, a young female officer came over and knelt in front of Emily. She had kind eyes and spoke softly, like a gentle breeze. "Hi, Emily. I'm Officer Sarah. Do you want something to drink? Maybe a hot chocolate?" Emily nodded slowly, still not letting go of Jonathan's sleeve. Officer Sarah smiled and got up to bring the drink. Jonathan leaned down and whispered, "It's okay, sweetie, you're doing great." Emily looked up and whispered back, "Thank you for stopping." Jonathan felt a lump in his throat. He had done what anyone should do but in that moment. It felt like the most important thing in the world. After a while, Officer Sarah returned with hot chocolate in a small paper cup and handed it to Emily. "There. You go, sweetheart. It's warm, not too hot," she said kindly. Emily took it with both hands and sipped quietly. Her hands were still shaking slightly, but the warmth seemed to help. Then another officer returned, Officer Daniels, a tall man with a serious face. But this time his expression was softer. "We got to the house," he said to Jonathan quietly. So Emily wouldn't hear everything. The mother was found unconscious but alive. She had some injuries, looks like bruises and maybe a broken wrist. Paramedics are taking care of her now. The father has been arrested. Jonathan let out a slow breath. Thank God. Your quick thinking probably saved her life, the officer added. If Emily hadn't gotten out and told you, this could have ended much worse. Jonathan looked down at Emily, who was still sipping her hot chocolate. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who just happened to be in the right place when someone needed help the most. Soon, a social worker named Mrs. Holland arrived. She was a kind-looking woman in her 40s, with glasses and a warm smile. She knelt beside Emily and introduced herself. Hi, Emily. My name is Mrs. Holland. I'm going to stay with you for a little while and help you feel safe, okay? Emily didn't speak but nodded. Mrs. Holland gently explained to Jonathan that Emily would be taken to a child protection center until her mother recovered. They needed to make sure she had a safe place to sleep and people to care for her. She'd be looked after by trained caregivers. We'll let her visit her mom as soon as she's able, she said. Jonathan nodded slowly. He understood. It was the right thing to do, but it still felt painful to see Emily leave. Before she got up, Emily turned to Jonathan and asked softly, Will you still drive the bus tomorrow? Jonathan smiled gently. I'll be there, just like always. She gave him a tiny smile and hugged him tightly before leaving with Mrs. Lala. Holland. It was a short hug, but it held 1,000 emotions, a mix of fear, relief, and hope. After she left, Jonathan sat alone for a few minutes. His hands were still trembling slightly. He didn't realize how deeply this had affected him until now. The calm mask he wore as a driver had cracked. Inside, something had shifted. This wasn't just about one little girl. It was bigger than that. When he finally returned to the bus, it was already late morning. The children who had been on the bus earlier had been picked up by their parents from the police station. Jonathan sat in the driver's seat for a while, staring at the steering wheel. He thought about Emily's mother. What kind of fear had she lived in, hiding behind closed doors? How many nights had she cried silently, hoping no one would notice? How many times had people passed by, pretending not to see? Jonathan's thoughts slowly drifted to his own. Past years ago, he had been a different man. He was married once, and he had a daughter. Back then, he had worked too much, stayed too late at bars, and ignored the problems at home. His wife had cried more often than smiled, but he had brushed it off. He didn't hit her, but he also didn't help her. He didn't listen when she needed him. And when she left with their daughter, he let them go, thinking they'd come back, but they never did. Jonathan had carried that regret for years. Maybe that's why he became a bus driver, so he could at least protect other children even if he had failed his own. He never told anyone about it. He just tried to do better one day at a time. That afternoon, back at the bus yard, Jonathan met with the school principal, Mr. Carter, and the school counselor. They wanted to talk about what happened and what to do next. Mr. Carter shook his hand firmly. You did the right thing today. You might have saved that little girl's life. Jonathan nodded humbly. I just did what needed to be done. The school counselor asked him more questions about Emily's behavior in the past. Had he noticed anything unusual? Jonathan paused. She was always quiet, polite, but sometimes she looked tired, a little too serious for a 7-year-old. Counselor nodded. We'll be reviewing everything, her records, past complaints, any signs the school might have missed. It hit Jonathan hard, signs the school might have missed. He thought of the teachers, the staff, even himself. Had they all looked away too long? Had they all been too busy, too afraid, or too blind? That night, Jonathan went home and sat in his small living room. He turned on the TV but didn't watch it. His mind was too full. He kept hearing Emily's voice, those 4 small words. He's hurting my mom. He got up and walked over to a drawer where he kept old letters and photos. He pulled out a dusty envelope with pictures of his daughter, Melissa. She was about the same age as Emily in those pictures. He hadn't seen her in over 12 years. The last time they spoke, she had told him she didn't want to see him again. At the time, he thought it was just anger. But now, after seeing what Emily went through, he wondered if maybe Melissa had felt the same kind of fear or sadness. Maybe. He hadn't done anything cruel, but he also hadn't done anything kind. He had stayed silent when he should have spoken. That realization felt like a punch to the chest. He sat there for hours thinking, and when the clock struck midnight, he made a decision. He picked up a pen and began to write a letter to his daughter. Dear Melissa, today something happened that made me remember everything I tried to forget.
Oh.
The words poured out of him, soft and slow. He didn't know if she would read it. He didn't know if she would forgive him. But for the first time in years, he felt like it was time to try. The next morning, Jonathan woke up early and returned to work. As he drove the empty bus to his first stop, he looked in the mirror and saw not just his face, but the face of a man trying to change, trying to be better. He didn't know what would happen to Emily and her mom next, but he promised himself one thing: he would never ignore the signs again. Not in children, not in adults, not in anyone. Because sometimes a small voice saying for simple words can be the loudest cry for help and the strongest push for someone else to finally listen. The town was small and peaceful, the kind of place where people waved to each other from porches and smiled while walking their dogs. On the surface, everything looked fine. But after what happened to little Emily and her mother, something deep beneath the surface had been shaken. People started whispering, asking questions they never thought they'd ask. How could such a thing happen right under their noses? How could no one have seen it coming? Jonathan had returned to work the very next day, just like he said he would. The school bus rolled down the same streets, past the same trees, stopped at the same corners, but something felt different. He felt different. Every time he stopped at a house to pick up a child, he found himself looking harder at their faces, their eyes, their body language. Were they hiding something like Emily had? Were they afraid to speak? The other kids on the bus talked about what had happened. Children always noticed more than adults gave them credit for. They had seen Emily's tear-streaked face. They had heard the silence that followed. Now they whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of it. Why was she crying? Did someone hurt her mom? Will she come back to school? Jonathan heard the questions but didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the road, but his ears listened. These kids were scared, confused. They didn't know how to talk about things like this, and no one had taught them. That day at school, teachers were also whispering in the halls. Some were angry, others were sad. But mostly, they were all feeling guilty. I thought the bruises were from playing too rough. She said her mom fell down the stairs. I believed her. We all did. Everyone was thinking the same thing. Maybe if they had paid more attention, they could have stopped it sooner. Maybe if someone had asked more questions, if someone had taken a closer look, Emily wouldn't have had to run barefoot through the woods for help. The school held a meeting that week for teachers and staff. The principal, Mr. Carter, stood in front of everyone with a serious face. We need to do better, he said, not just as a school, but as a community. They discussed new ways to watch for signs of abuse changes in behavior. Odd injuries, fear of certain adults. Counselor offered training sessions, and the teachers agreed to attend. For the first time, the adults stopped assuming and started listening. At the same time, Emily's story spread through the town like wildfire. It wasn't shared with all the details, of course. Her identity was protected, but people knew. Knew a little girl had saved her mother by being brave. Damned, they knew a school bus driver had made a quick decision that saved lives. And suddenly, everyone started wondering what else had been hiding behind closed doors. One neighbor said, I thought I heard shouting some nights, but I didn't want to get involved. Another said, I saw the mom wearing sunglasses inside once. I just thought she was tired. A woman at the grocery store said, Emily always seemed so quiet. I thought she was just shy. Jonathan heard these stories, and each one made his stomach turn. They all had seen the signs, but no one had wanted to believe them. No one had wanted to ask the hard questions. It was easier to assume everything was fine. One morning, Jonathan went to visit the hospital where Emily's mother was recovering. He wasn't sure if she'd want to see him, but he went anyway. Felt like he needed to. He walked into the room slowly. The woman in the hospital bed had a cast on her wrist, bruises on her face, and tired eyes. But when she saw Jonathan, she sat up a little straighter and gave a small smile. You're the bus driver, she said softly. Yes, ma'am, Jonathan replied, taking off his cap. I just wanted to see if you were okay. She nodded slowly. I'm better now. I don't know how to thank you. Jonathan shook his head. You don't have to thank me. Your daughter was the brave one. Tears welled up in the woman's eyes. I should have left him a long time ago, but I was scared. I didn't think anyone would believe me. I didn't want to break up our family. Jonathan sat down in the chair beside her bed. Sometimes we get so used to the pain that we forget what peace feels like. She looked at him, surprised by his words. He gave her a small, sad smile. I made mistakes too, he said, different ones. But I know what it's like to stay quiet when you should speak up. They talked for a while. She told him more about the years she spent hiding bruises, lying. 2 neighbors, and pretending everything was okay for Emily's sake. Jonathan listened quietly. He didn't judge her, just listened. Sometimes that's all someone really needs. When he left the hospital, something inside him felt lighter. He wasn't proud of what had happened to Emily, but he was proud that she was safe now. He had helped, even in a small way. Back at home, Jonathan pulled out the letter he had written to his daughter Melissa. He hadn't sent it yet, he read. It again then added a few more lines at the end. I saw myself in that little girl's story. I saw my silence in her mother's pain. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know I'm trying to change. He put the letter in an envelope, wrote Melissa's address, and mailed it the next morning. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. Then, one evening, while Jonathan was sitting on his porch drinking coffee, he heard the mailman stop by. He walked to the mailbox, expecting bills or advertisements. But inside was a small envelope with handwriting he hadn't seen. In years, it was from Melissa. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a short note. I read your letter. I also saw the article about the little girl and the bus driver. I knew it was you. I don't know if I'm ready to talk yet, but I'd like to meet for coffee. One step at a time. Jonathan stared at the words, his eyes filling with tears. For years, he had believed he didn't deserve a second chance. But now, maybe he had one. Meanwhile, Emily had been placed in temporary care with a foster family. It was a kind older couple who treated her with gentle love and patience. She missed her mother, but she felt safe. She had her own room, clean clothes, warm meals, and most importantly, peace. Her mother was recovering well and attending counseling sessions. She was learning how to rebuild her life and protect her daughter in ways she had never been able to before. The road ahead was long, but it was no longer filled with fear. One sunny morning, Emily returned to school for the first time since the incident. She walked quietly through the hallway, unsure how the other kids would react. Some stared, some whispered, but then something unexpected happened. A little boy from her class walked up to her and handed her a drawing. It was a picture of a girl with a superhero cape and a smile. You're brave, he said simply. Emily blinked, unsure of what to say. But then she smiled, real smile, the kind she hadn't shown in a long time. That day, Jonathan pulled up to the school in his bus. The door opened and Emily stepped on, holding her backpack tightly. She looked at him and grinned. Hi, Mr. Reed. Jonathan smiled warmly. Welcome back, Emily. We missed you. She walked to her usual seat near the front and looked out the window. The world outside seemed brighter now as the bus drove off. Jonathan thought about everything that had happened, the silence of the past, the pain hidden behind doors, the courage it took for a child to run, and the change it sparked in everyone who heard her story. Emily had said 4 simple words, but those words had opened eyes, opened hearts, and even opened the door to a broken relationship that Jonathan never thought he'd fix. Sometimes change starts with something small, a whisper, a cry, a moment of bravery. And when that moment is met with action, the world begins to heal. Jonathan didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, in a long while, he felt hopeful. And somewhere deep in the heart of the town, others began to feel it too. The morning sky was soft and clear, with light clouds drifting gently above the quiet town. But inside the hearts of many people, things were no longer quiet. The story of Emily and her mother had touched everyone deeply. Some couldn't stop thinking about it. Others couldn't stop talking about it. The pain, the fear, The bravery it had reached into places that people usually tried to keep closed. Jonathan sat alone in his kitchen, staring at the letter from his daughter Melissa. He had read it at least a dozen times. Her words were short, but they meant the world to him. After all these years, she was finally willing to talk again. He remembered the last time they had spoken. It wasn't good, Melissa had yelled, cried, and walked out of his life. And he had let her. He had told himself it was her choice. But deep down, he knew the truth. He hadn't fought for her, hadn't listened when she needed him the most. He had chosen silence, just like so many people had done with Emily. That silence had built walls around his heart. But now, because of 4 words from a little girl, those walls had started to crack. Jonathan looked at his calendar. Melissa had written that she wanted to meet for coffee in a few days. He felt nervous. What would he say? What if she still hated him? What if she only came to say goodbye forever? The thoughts made his stomach twist, but he knew he had to face it. He had to take the step, no matter how scared he felt. That same week, the local newspaper released a special article titled, "The Girl Who Spoken Saved a Life." It told the story of a child who had escaped a violent home and found safety with the help of a bus driver.
Ow.
The names were kept private,
Ow.
but everyone in town knew who it was about. The article talked about how the community had ignored the signs. It shared messages from counselors, teachers, even neighbors. It asked hard questions. Why didn't anyone speak up? Why did it take a child's cry for help to finally open their eyes? People read the article at coffee shops, on buses and schools. They folded it and kept it. Some even cried. And Jonathan, well, he got a surprise. One evening, his phone rang.
Ow, yes.
It was a reporter from the newspaper. She asked if he would be willing to share his side of the story, his thoughts, his feelings. At first, he said no. Didn't like attention. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man doing his job. But the reporter was gentle and patient, she said. Maybe your voice could help others speak up too. Jonathan thought about it all night. In the end, he agreed. He met with the reporter a few days later at a quiet diner. She asked him questions about that day, about Emily, and about what happened after. He answered slowly, choosing his words carefully. Then she asked a question he hadn't expected. Why did you believe her right away, she asked. Many people don't. They doubt. They wait. But you acted. Jonathan looked out the window for a moment. The trees were moving gently in the wind. I think, he said softly, because I know what silence does. I've seen what it destroys. And then, for the first time, he talked about his past, about Melissa, about how he failed her, how he missed the signs in his own home. The reporter listened quietly. She didn't interrupt. She simply wrote everything down. When the new article came out, it wasn't just about Emily. It was about Jonathan Tua, man who had once been blind to pain but chose not to be again. That article hit even harder. People didn't expect to read about a bus driver with a broken past, but they respected it. They admired his honesty, and they started to look at the people around them differently. One teacher at the school said, "I used to think kids like Emily didn't want to talk. Now I know they're just waiting for someone to ask the right question." A neighbor who lived close to Emily's house came forward and told police he had seen the father yelling many times before. He had never reported it because he thought it was none of his business. Now he regretted it deeply. Even churches and community centers started hosting talks about child safety and domestic abuse. They invited experts, survivors, and even ordinary people to speak. People started sharing their own stories, stories they had kept hidden for years. And Jonathan? He was invited to one of those talks. First, he didn't want to go. He felt uncomfortable speaking in front of crowds. But when he thought of Emily, her tear-streaked face, her trembling voice, he said yes. He stood on a small stage in front of maybe 40 people. His hands were shaking. His heart raced. But when he looked into the crowd, he saw Melissa sitting in the back row. His voice caught in his throat. But then he took a deep breath and began. "I'm not a perfect man," he said. "I've made mistakes, big ones. And I've stayed quiet when I should have spoken. But I'm trying now. I'm trying to be someone my daughter can be proud of. I'm trying to be someone kids like Emily can trust." The room was silent. No one moved. Everyone listened. When he finished speaking, people stood and clapped. Some cried. And Melissa Shea stood, walked up to him, and hugged him tightly. They didn't say anything. Didn't have to. That hug said it all. From that day on, Jonathan and Melissa started rebuilding their relationship. Slowly, carefully, they met for coffee once a week. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat together in silence. But that silence felt different now. It wasn't filled with pain. It was filled with peace. Meanwhile, Emily and her mother were also starting over. Her mom had found a small apartment in another part of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. She had a new job at a local bakery and was attending therapy every week. Emily started drawing again. Her foster parents had given her a sketchbook, and she filled it with pictures of trees, animals, superheroes. But her favorite drawing was of a yellow school bus with a smiling driver. She kept that drawing in her backpack, close to her heart. One day her mother was strong enough to take her back home. Not to the old house, but to their new place. Emily was quiet during the ride, looking out the window. "Are you scared?" her mother asked. Emily nodded a little. Her mom squeezed her hand. "Me too, but we're going to be okay." That same week, Emily returned to her old school. Kids welcomed her kindly. They had missed her. And when she stepped onto the bus that morning, Jonathan stood up and smiled. "Good to see you again, Emily." She grinned. "I brought you something." She handed him a folded piece of paper. Inside was her drawing, the one of the bus. "It's us," she said. "You're the hero." Jonathan blinked away tears. "No, Emily, you are." And deep inside, he believed it. That little girl had done more than just save her mother. She had opened hearts, healed wounds, and reminded everyone that even small voices can change the world. As the bus rolled down the road, sunlight spilled through the windows. Kids laughed, books opened, and the world seemed just a little bit brighter. Jonathan glanced in the mirror and smiled. He knew he wasn't just driving a bus anymore. He was carrying stories, carrying second chances, carrying hope. And in a town that once looked away, people were finally learning to see. It had been a few months since that emotional morning when Emily had run crying to the bus and whispered those 4 heartbreaking words. A lot had changed since then. The town, once quiet and unaware, had been shaken awake. Emily's story had moved everyone, not just because of what she went through, but also because it had made many people realize how easy it was to look away and pretend not to see. But one man, Jonathan Reed, hadn't looked away, and his actions had started something. Much bigger than anyone expected, the cold winter had slowly turned into spring, and with it came healing, hope, and new beginnings. Emily was now living safely with her mother again. Her mom had recovered well from her injuries thanks to the quick help from police and doctors. She had also been attending counseling, learning how to move forward and rebuild her life with Emily. Though both mother and daughter had many emotional wounds, they were no longer hiding in fear. Their little apartment, small but filled with laughter and warmth, had become their safe place. Jonathan, the bus driver, had become somewhat of a local hero. He never wanted attention or praise, but the town couldn't ignore what he had done. The news about him driving the bus full of kids straight to the police station and protecting Emily had spread quickly. His picture had even appeared in a few online articles. But what touched people the most wasn't just the story, it was the honesty in his interview that followed. When the local journalist came to interview Jonathan, he almost said no. Didn't want to become some celebrity, but something inside him told him that maybe this was a chance to say something that mattered. During the interview, Jonathan spoke openly. He talked about the moment Emily came running, the fear in her eyes, and the shock he felt when she said, "He's hurting my mom." But then he surprised everyone by sharing something even more personal, something he had never told anyone outside his family. Years ago, Jonathan had been married and had a daughter of his own. Her name was Lily. When she was a teenager, Jonathan worked long hours trying to provide a good life. He missed dinners, missed school plays, and didn't notice the sadness in his wife's eyes. He didn't see the signs that she was suffering. She never told him about the emotional pain she was going through, and he never asked. One day, she packed her bags and left with Lily. No fights, no screaming, just silence. Jonathan tried to reach out to his daughter afterward, but she was angry. She felt like he hadn't protected her mother. She said he had looked the other way when he should have seen something was wrong. Over the years, their bond disappeared. Jonathan kept driving buses, quietly carrying children every day, wondering if his own daughter was out there somewhere, remembering him. When Emily's situation happened, it was like life had given him a second chance to do the right thing. In the article, he said, "I didn't speak up when I should have. I didn't ask the hard questions. Maybe I was scared. Maybe I just didn't want to believe something was wrong. But when Emily told me those 4 words, I knew I couldn't stay silent again." His words hit people hard. The article went viral online. People shared their own stories in the comments, stories of hidden abuse, missed signs, and silent pain. Teachers wrote about the importance of listening to children. Parents talked about how they started paying more attention at home. And somewhere, far from that little town, a woman named Lily read the story. She read the article twice, then 3 times. She hadn't spoken to her father in years. She had hated him for not noticing her mother's sadness, for being absent, even when he was home. But reading his words now, something changed in her heart. She saw the guilt, the honesty, and the regret. And more than that, she saw the man who had protected a little girl when it mattered most. She sent him a message. Just a few words. "I read your story. I'd like to talk." When Jonathan read her message, he couldn't believe his eyes. I stared at it for several minutes before his hands stopped shaking long enough to reply. They agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop the following week. The day of the meeting, Jonathan arrived early. He sat nervously watching the door every few seconds. When Lily finally walked in, he stood up, unsure if he should hug her or not. She walked over and gave him a long, silent hug. They sat for hours, talking. There were tears, apologies, and a lot of awkward silences, but also laughter, smiles, and a beginning. A real one. Meanwhile, the town had decided to do something special. Every year, they held a small community ceremony to honor people who had done something meaningful. Teachers, firefighters, volunteers. This year, they decided to include a new category: everyday heroes. They invited Jonathan, even though he tried to politely decline. But Emily and her mother insisted he come. On the day of the ceremony, families gathered in the park. There was a small stage decorated with colorful ribbons and balloons. Kids ran around laughing. Jonathan arrived quietly, trying to blend in. But when his name was called, the crowd clapped loudly. He walked to the stage slowly, still unsure why he deserved such attention. Emily was already standing there, holding her mother's hand. When she saw Jonathan, she ran over and gave him a big hug in front of everyone. She whispered, "Thank you for saving us." Her mother smiled warmly at him, her eyes full of gratitude. The mayor handed him a small award and said, "This is for the man who listened when it mattered most." Then something unexpected happened. Lily, Jonathan's daughter, stepped forward from the audience. She had come to support her father, and she wasn't hiding anymore. She walked up to the stage, hugged him, and said, "I'm proud of you, Dad." People in the crowd were wiping their eyes. What had started as one little girl crying on a school morning had now turned into a story of healing, courage, and love. Emily had found safety. Her mother had found strength. Jonathan had found redemption. And Lily had found forgiveness after the ceremony. Emily, her mother, Jonathan, and Lily sat together on a picnic blanket. They talked about life, laughed at silly stories, and watched the sunset. Emily leaned her head on Jonathan's shoulder and said, "You're like a hero in a movie." Jonathan smiled and replied, "No, I just did what I should have done." As night fell, the lights in the park glowed softly, and the town felt a little warmer, a little kinder. People had learned something important, that sometimes all it takes is listening to a child, believing them, and standing up when it's needed. Jonathan had once failed to do that in his own life, but when he got a second chance, he didn't hesitate. And because of that, not just one life, but many lives were changed forever. The road ahead was still long, with ups and downs, but now it was filled with hope. All of it began with one small voice. One moment of courage and 4 simple words whispered through tears. "He's hurting my mom."